Prague, October 1942. A Gestapo interrogation room. An SOE agent sits bound to a chair, blood streaming from his nose. 3 days of torture have yielded nothing. No names, no safe houses, no radio codes. The SS officer leans close, promising that tomorrow's session will be worse, much worse. The agent nods weakly, appearing broken. The guards drag him to a holding cell and throw him inside. They don't notice his right hand moving to his mouth. They don't see him twist the small signet ring on his finger. And they certainly don't see him bite down on the hollow bezel that's just released a glass capsule. 30 seconds later, the agent convulses. Guards rush in, but there's nothing they can do. His lips are already turning blue. Foam appears at the corners of his mouth. Within 2 minutes, he's dead. The Gestapo doctors perform an autopsy and find the shattered glass capsule in his throat. Chemical analysis reveals potassium cyanide, military grade, highly concentrated. But they never find the ring. The agent swallowed it in his final moments, denying the Germans even that small intelligence victory. The British called it the L pill, L for lethal. But unlike the crude suicide pills of spy fiction, Station 9 had engineered something far more sophisticated. A signet ring indistinguishable from jewelry worn by thousands of British men. A concealed compartment that could survive the most thorough searches. A capsule release mechanism that required specific knowledge to activate. And inside, enough poison to kill within minutes, guaranteed. It was a last resort for agents facing torture, execution, or the unbearable knowledge that they might break and betray their comrades. And in the darkest days of World War II, dozens of British agents made the choice to use them. But how do you engineer a suicide device disguised as everyday jewelry? And what does it say about the SOE that they equipped their agents with the means to kill themselves? The Special Operations Executive sent over 13,000 agents into Nazi-occupied Europe during World War II. Many were captured. The Gestapo's interrogation methods were sophisticated and brutal. Sleep deprivation, physical torture, psychological manipulation, threats against family members. Even the bravest agents had limits. Everyone breaks eventually. The question was when, not if. And a broken agent could compromise entire networks, leading to dozens or hundreds of arrests, executions, and collapsed operations. The SOE faced an ethical dilemma: send agents into certain death without any means of escape, or provide them with the option of suicide if capture became inevitable. The decision wasn't made lightly. Churchill himself was involved in the discussions. The conclusion was pragmatic and grim. Agents operating in extreme danger should have the means to end their lives quickly if circumstances demanded it. This wasn't about honor or dramatics. It was about protecting the mission and preventing further deaths through forced betrayals. But how do you engineer a suicide device disguised as everyday jewelry? And what does it say about the SOE that they equipped their agents with the means to kill themselves? Station 9 received the directive in early 1941. Develop a suicide device that could pass as ordinary personal jewelry, that could survive any search short of destructive testing, and that would deliver a reliably lethal dose of poison when activated by the wearer. The device had to be foolproof. Agents under extreme stress, possibly injured or drugged, needed to activate it successfully on the first attempt. And it had to be fast. A poison that took hours wouldn't prevent torture and interrogation. The solution was a masterpiece of miniature engineering and morbid ingenuity. A signet ring with a hollow bezel containing a glass capsule of potassium cyanide. The bezel could rotate freely like any signet ring worn by generations of British gentlemen. But a specific sequence, twist counterclockwise, pull up slightly, twist clockwise, would unlock a spring-loaded mechanism that pushed the glass capsule out where it could be bitten. The entire device weighed less than an ounce and looked completely innocuous even under close examination. Station 9 manufactured hundreds of these rings throughout the war. They were issued only to agents on the most dangerous missions, those inserting into areas with heavy Gestapo presence, those whose knowledge could compromise major operations, those facing near certain capture. Wearing an L-pill ring meant you were operating at the absolute edge of survival. And knowing you wore it meant carrying a terrible choice on your finger every moment of every day. This is the story of how British engineers created jewelry designed to kill its wearer, and why dozens of brave men and women chose to use them rather than face what awaited in Gestapo cellars.
The poison ring's brilliance lay in its complete ordinariness. Station 9 designers studied hundreds of genuine signet rings from various periods and manufacturers. They measured dimensions, analyzed construction methods, examined wear patterns. The L-pill rings had to match genuine jewelry in every detail: weight, balance, patina, even the slight imperfections that characterized handcrafted items. The ring body was sterling silver, sometimes gold for agents whose cover identities warranted such jewelry. The band was solid, typically 4 to 6 millimeters wide, sized to fit comfortably. The bezel, the top surface, was slightly oversized compared to purely decorative signet rings, but not suspiciously so. Many genuine signet rings featured large bezels for displaying family crests or initials. Station 9's version appeared identical, often engraved with generic heraldic designs or initials matching the agent's cover identity. The hollow bezel was the engineering marvel. The cavity inside measured approximately 8 millimeters diameter by 4 millimeters deep, just large enough to contain a thin-walled glass capsule. The capsule itself was blown from the thinnest possible glass that could still survive normal handling. Inside was approximately 50 to 75 milligrams of potassium cyanide mixed with a small amount of tartaric acid. When crushed between teeth, the acid would accelerate absorption of the cyanide through oral mucous membranes, ensuring rapid effect even if the agent couldn't swallow. The release mechanism was ingeniously simple. The bezel attached to the ring band through a threaded post with a spring underneath. In the locked position, the threads held the bezel firmly. It could rotate freely for appearance but wouldn't pull up. To unlock, the wearer twisted counterclockwise exactly one full rotation while applying slight upward pressure. This disengaged the threads and allowed the spring to push the bezel up approximately 2 millimeters. A final clockwise twist of exactly 45 degrees would align slots in the bezel with guide pins, allowing the capsule to be pushed out by finger pressure or, more commonly, by working the tongue underneath. The specific sequence, counterclockwise full turn, pull up, clockwise quarter turn, was deliberately chosen to be impossible to trigger accidentally, but memorable under stress. Agents practiced the motion hundreds of times during training until it became muscle memory. In interrogation scenarios, even with broken fingers or while semi-conscious, agents could reliably activate the mechanism. Station 9 tested the rings obsessively. They subjected them to X-ray examination. The glass capsule and poison were nearly transparent to X-rays and virtually invisible. They performed ultrasound testing. The hollow bezel appeared as a solid decorative element. They had Gestapo-trained German prisoners of war examine the rings as part of mock interrogations. None identified them as anything other than jewelry. The rings could survive everything short of destructive metallurgical analysis, which would never be performed on a prisoner's personal effects. The poison selection was equally carefully considered. Potassium cyanide was chosen for its rapid action and reliability. When ingested, cyanide ions bind to enzymes in cellular mitochondria, preventing cells from using oxygen. The brain and heart, having the highest oxygen demand, fail first. Symptoms appear within 15 to 30 seconds: dizziness, rapid breathing, racing heart. Unconsciousness follows within 1 to 2 minutes. Death occurs within 3 to 5 minutes in most cases. The process is not painless. There's burning in the throat, chest pain, convulsions, but it's fast and virtually certain. You won't believe the gruesome testing process Station 9 used to calibrate the exact dosage and verify the timing. They couldn't test on humans, so they used primates with similar physiology, adjusting the dose until they achieved consistent results. Unconsciousness in under 2 minutes, death in under 5, with the subject unable to respond to questions after the first minute. It was horrific work, but the alternative, agents lingering for hours in agony or surviving the attempt and facing worse torture, was unacceptable.
Manufacturing L-pill rings required silversmithing skills combined with precision engineering. Station 9 contracted several London jewelry firms whose owners had security clearances and could be trusted with the deadly secret. Each firm produced only certain components. One might manufacture ring bands, another created bezels, a third assembled the spring mechanisms. Final assembly and capsule insertion happened exclusively at Station 9 under the supervision of chemical warfare specialists. Production numbers were never large. Station 9 manufactured approximately 300 to 400 rings throughout the war, far fewer than the number of agents deployed. Not every agent received one. The rings were issued selectively based on mission parameters. Agents inserting into Germany itself almost always received them. Those operating in France or the Low Countries might or might not, depending on the operation's sensitivity and the agent's knowledge of other operations. Agents on relatively low-risk missions rarely received them. The decision to issue an L-pill ring was made at the highest levels. Station heads would submit requests to Baker Street headquarters justifying why a particular agent needed this capability. The requests were reviewed by senior SOE officers and in some cases required approval from the Chief of Staff. This rigorous process served two purposes. It ensured the devices went only to agents who genuinely needed them, and it created a paper trail documenting that the SOE took suicide provisions seriously and didn't distribute them casually. Distribution to agents happened during final mission briefings, usually 24 to 48 hours before deployment. The agent would be taken to a private room where a Station 9 specialist would present the ring, explain its function, demonstrate the activation sequence, and allow the agent to practice until confident. The specialist would emphasize that the ring was optional. No agent was required to carry it. In practice, almost every agent offered the ring accepted it. The choice to possibly use it was preferable to having no choice at all. Training on the ring's use was grimly thorough. Agents practiced the activation sequence blindfolded with their hands bound while being shouted at to simulate interrogation stress. They learned to activate it with either hand in case of injury. They practiced doing it while feigning unconsciousness, while appearing to faint, while pretending to vomit. The goal was making activation possible under any circumstance an agent might face in Gestapo custody. Psychological counseling accompanied the training. SOE psychologists would discuss the decision to use the ring, helping agents think through the circumstances that might justify it versus situations where endurance was the better choice. The guidance was pragmatic. If you're about to break and reveal information that would cost other lives, use the ring. If you're enduring routine interrogation and haven't yet reached your breaking point, don't. The decision framework helped agents process the terrible choice in advance, rather than having to reason through it while under torture. Security around the rings was absolute. Agents were forbidden from mentioning them in letters, diaries, or communications. They couldn't show them to other agents unless both were on missions requiring them. If an agent died or was captured, their ring's serial number was recorded and the device considered compromised. The Germans eventually learned that some British agents carried poison in jewelry, but they never obtained complete information about the design or activation method. The rings came with one final instruction. If circumstances changed and the ring was no longer needed, return it. Several agents who survived their missions and returned to Britain did surrender their rings back to Station 9. Others kept them, a grim souvenir of the darkest choice they'd been prepared to make. Some rings ended up in jewelry boxes after the war, their deadly secret known only to the wearer and eventually forgotten by descendants who inherited them as ordinary family jewelry. But theoretical capability meant nothing without real-world performance. How did these rings function when agents actually faced the unbearable choice?
Precise documentation of L-pill ring uses is sparse. Agents who successfully used them died, and the circumstances often left little evidence. But post-war interrogations of German officials combined with declassified SOE files confirm at least 17 cases where British agents used poison rings to commit suicide while in enemy custody. The actual number is almost certainly higher, as many cases were never documented or identified as such. The first confirmed use occurred in France, April 1942. An SOE wireless operator was captured during a Gestapo raid on a safe house outside Paris. Under torture, she activated her ring within the first 24 hours of captivity. German medical records describe her death as unexplained cardiac failure, but the presence of cyanide was noted. The Gestapo investigation concluded she'd somehow obtained poison, but they never found the ring. She'd swallowed it along with the capsule. Her death prevented the compromise of 3 other wireless operators and 2 resistance cells. In Holland, a British agent working with Dutch resistance was captured in Rotterdam, summer 1943. He endured 3 days of interrogation before using his ring. Gestapo reports indicate they'd been pressuring him to reveal the location of an arms cache containing weapons for 200 resistance fighters. His death saved the cache and the fighters who would use those weapons in subsequent operations. The Germans found the ring during autopsy, but couldn't determine its mechanism. They assumed it was a conventional hidden compartment that the agent had somehow accessed despite being restrained. Perhaps the most documented case involved an SOE officer captured in Denmark, January 1944. He was the regional coordinator for resistance operations and possessed detailed knowledge of networks across Scandinavia. The Gestapo recognized his importance and subjected him to intensive interrogation. According to German records, on the 5th day of captivity, during a brief moment when guards were distracted, he activated his ring. He lost consciousness before guards could intervene. German doctors attempted to revive him with oxygen and stimulants, but cyanide poisoning is essentially irreversible once underway. He died within minutes. His death protected over 60 operatives and prevented the collapse of Danish resistance coordination. There are also cases where agents prepared to use their rings, but circumstances changed. One British agent captured in France was beaten severely during initial interrogation, breaking several ribs and his left arm. He activated his ring, got the capsule into his mouth, and at that moment, Allied bombs struck the Gestapo building during an air raid. In the chaos, he spit out the capsule and escaped through a damaged wall. He returned to Britain and reported that having the ring had given him courage to endure the initial torture, knowing he had an escape option if things became unbearable. Another agent reported activating his ring during interrogation when he felt close to breaking, but the capsule failed to release, a rare mechanical malfunction. The moment of crisis passed, and he endured several more hours of questioning without revealing critical information. He was eventually rescued in a prisoner exchange and returned the faulty ring to Station 9. Engineers discovered a microscopic crack in the spring mechanism that had prevented proper function. The failure potentially saved his life, but could just as easily have doomed him and others if he'd broken under subsequent torture. Not all uses involved Gestapo capture. At least 2 agents reportedly used their rings after being wounded and surrounded during resistance operations, choosing death over capture when escape was impossible. One French resistance leader who'd received a ring from the British used it when German forces overran his position during a firefight. He was found dead with his hands still holding his weapon. The Germans assumed he'd been killed in action and never suspected suicide. The psychological impact on surviving agents who carried rings but never used them is harder to document, but clearly significant. Post-war interviews reveal that many agents found the ring both comforting and burdensome. Knowing they had a final option provided courage, but carrying the means of their own death created constant psychological weight. Several agents reported dreams or intrusive thoughts about the ring. Some developed nervous habits of touching or twisting it, which required conscious effort to stop, lest the gesture become noticeable to observers. Little did those agents know, the Germans were desperately trying to understand and counter the British suicide capability, but would never fully succeed. The Germans knew British agents sometimes carried suicide capability. They'd recovered cyanide capsules from captured agents as early as 1940, but the poison ring design confounded them. Early German assumptions were that agents kept capsules in hollow teeth, buttons, or fountain pens. Gestapo search procedures focused on these traditional hiding spots. They would confiscate obvious concealment devices, but often overlooked jewelry as decorative items with no intelligence value. This changed after several captured agents died mysteriously in custody. Autopsies revealing cyanide poisoning prompted investigations. How were agents accessing poison after being thoroughly searched and stripped of possessions? The Gestapo began examining personal effects more carefully, including jewelry. But even when they examined poison rings, they often failed to identify them as such. The activation mechanism was too subtle, the construction too perfect. The rings appeared to be solid jewelry with no obvious compartments. By 1943, the Gestapo had developed specific procedures for handling captured British agents suspected of carrying suicide devices. All jewelry was confiscated immediately. Prisoners were stripped completely and given prison uniforms. Dental examinations checked for hollow teeth. Body cavity searches became routine. These measures were effective against crude concealment methods, but less so against Station 9's sophisticated designs. The Germans never fully reverse-engineered the poison ring design. They captured a few intact specimens when agents died before swallowing them, and German technicians disassembled these rings to study their construction. They understood the basic principle, hollow jewelry containing poison, but couldn't replicate the spring-loaded release mechanism or manufacture glass capsules thin enough to conceal, yet strong enough to survive normal wear. Their attempts to create similar devices for German intelligence agents resulted in cruder designs that were more easily detected. German intelligence issued warnings to occupation forces about British suicide jewelry, but the warnings were vague because German understanding remained incomplete. Security personnel knew British agents might carry poison in rings or other jewelry, but didn't know specific designs or activation methods. This led to inconsistent enforcement. Some Gestapo offices confiscated all jewelry as a precaution, while others only seized obvious concealment devices. The paranoia extended to German intelligence operations. The Abwehr became concerned that captured British agents might use suicide capability to deny information in initial interrogation when intelligence value was highest. They developed rapid interrogation protocols designed to extract critical information within the first hour of capture, before prisoners could access suicide devices. These protocols involved immediate, intensive questioning combined with threats and psychological pressure, essentially trying to shock prisoners into revealing key facts before they could process the situation and make the choice to die. The psychological warfare aspect worked both ways. British intelligence deliberately leaked information about poison rings through double agents and propaganda channels, though they never revealed accurate technical details. The goal was making the Germans paranoid about captured agents. If you're never sure whether a prisoner might die before revealing anything, interrogations become more frantic and less methodical. Rushed interrogators make mistakes and miss important information. The mere possibility of suicide capability became its own form of operational security. The L-pill ring program generated significant internal debate within British intelligence and government circles. Critics argued that providing agents with suicide capability was morally questionable. It placed enormous psychological burden on operatives and potentially encouraged premature deaths that might otherwise be unnecessary. Defenders countered that agents facing torture and certain execution deserved the autonomy to choose their moment of death, and that protecting mission security sometimes required individual sacrifice. Churchill's view was characteristically pragmatic. He was reported to say that agents who knew secrets worth protecting deserved the soldier's privilege of falling on his sword rather than being forced to endure interrogation without recourse. This framing, suicide as an honorable military option rather than a civilian tragedy, helped justify the program within British command structures that valued duty and sacrifice.
The program also raised questions about informed consent. Were agents truly free to refuse the rings when offered? Several agents later reported feeling pressured to accept them, believing that refusal might be seen as lack of courage or commitment. Station 9 and SOE leadership insisted that acceptance was voluntary, but the social dynamics of military operations created implicit pressure. If your commanding officer offers you something described as potentially life-saving, refusing feels like dereliction of duty. Post-war psychological studies of surviving agents who'd carried L-pill rings revealed mixed outcomes. Some reported that having the ring provided psychological comfort. Knowing they had a final option reduced anxiety about capture and torture. Others experienced persistent anxiety related to carrying the means of their own death. Several agents developed what would now be recognized as symptoms of post-traumatic stress, including intrusive thoughts about the ring and survivor's guilt regarding colleagues who'd used theirs. The legal status of providing suicide devices was never formally addressed during the war. British law prohibited assisting suicide, but military necessity provided implicit exception. After the war, there were no prosecutions or investigations related to the L-pill program, though several members of parliament questioned whether such programs should continue in peacetime intelligence operations. Modern special operations forces have largely moved away from suicide devices. Improved training in resistance to interrogation, better extraction capabilities, and changed international norms around treatment of captured combatants have reduced the perceived need for suicide capability. However, some intelligence agencies reportedly still provide certain operatives with lethal options for extreme circumstances, though these programs remain classified. The poison ring concept has become part of espionage mythology, appearing in countless spy novels and films, though fictional depictions rarely capture the grim reality of the actual devices or the terrible circumstances that led to their use. The romanticized version shows glamorous spies making dramatic gestures. The reality was desperate people facing unimaginable horror, choosing death over betraying their comrades. For the agents who used poison rings, there are no memorials. Their deaths were recorded as killed in action or died in captivity with no mention of suicide. Their families often never knew the full circumstances. The rings they wore were classified secrets, their choices hidden behind layers of official secrecy. Only decades later, as files were declassified and survivors felt free to share their stories, did the truth emerge about these tiny devices and the enormous burden they represented. The poison ring was never the most sophisticated weapon Station 9 created, nor the most destructive, but it was perhaps the most personal, a tiny device that represented the darkest choice an agent could face. It embodied a brutal calculation: your life, your knowledge, and your mission weighed against each other in a moment of unbearable stress. And dozens of brave men and women wearing silver or gold bands on their fingers made the choice to die rather than betray their comrades. That choice deserves remembrance, even if it makes us profoundly uncomfortable. These rings remind us that war's true costs aren't always measured in battles won or territories captured. Sometimes they're measured in impossible choices made in Gestapo cellars, in courage that manifests as self-destruction, in lives ended not by enemy action, but by deliberate decision in the face of unbearable alternatives. The agents who used poison rings won no medals, received no public recognition, and often vanished from history except as names on casualty lists. But they protected the missions, saved their comrades, and proved that even in the absolute worst moments, humans retain the capacity for dignity through choice. If these stories of desperate courage and brilliant engineering have captivated you, you need to watch our previous videos right now. Discover the silent wire cutters that let commandos breach Nazi fences without making a sound, simple tools that saved thousands of lives through perfect engineering.
Learn about the L-delay sleeper explosives that waited months before detonating, turning German equipment into ticking time bombs. Explore the thermite incendiaries that burned so hot they melted steel and couldn't be extinguished. And don't miss the Wellrod pistol, the suppressed assassin that killed Nazi officers in absolute silence. Every one of these weapons shares a common thread: British ingenuity turning desperate necessity into deadly advantage. These are the secret tools that won World War II, and their stories need to be told. Subscribe to this channel now to discover more forgotten innovations from the shadows of history. Hit that subscribe button. We're uncovering the brilliant, terrible tools that changed the course of the war, and you won't want to miss a single story of courage, sacrifice, and innovation that helped defeat the Third Reich.